Welcome to Fearless Jeans, Southern Cuisine. My name is Major, and this podcast, Fearless Jeans, Southern Cuisine, is a tribute to my parents' recipe box. I inherited their recipe box after my mom passed away. And the title of this episode is Weevil'S In The Chili. My parents got married in the mid-60s in North Mississippi. And like most young newlyweds, they didn't have a ton of money starting out. I don't know that they ever had a ton of money to begin with, but they made do. We never knew that times were hard. So, but before my parents had kids, let me tell you a little about my parents. My father's middle name was Fearless. He hated it because it was spelled Phurless, looked like furless. It's an Old English form of fearless. My mother's middle name was Jean, hence Fearless Jean. My mom always called my father Chili, and it wasn't until much later in life that I realized that Chili is not a rendition of Charles, my father's first name. Charles, Chuck, Charlie, but Chili is not one. So I asked my mom, why have you always called Dad Chili? Well, here's their story. They made a pot of chili, a huge pot of chili, probably one Friday night. It was going to last them all weekend until the next paycheck or whenever they could go to the grocery store again. And I think the story goes they cooked the chili, they made the chili, they had the recipe for the chili, and they ate the chili. They put the chili away in the refrigerator, and the next day, upon retrieving the chili and putting it on the stove to warm it up, my mom opens the top and realizes that there are weevils in the chili. So she proceeds to take the whole pot of chili and she makes a beeline for the fence line in the backyard, where my father bursts out the back door and says to my mother, Linda, her first name, "What are you doing?" And she says, "I'm throwing this chili over the fence because there's weevils in it. I'm not eating bugs." And my dad said, "Sweetheart, that's all the food we've got." And now I don't know if the weevils were crawling in it or if they were dead, but my father tells her, "Don't you throw that chili over the fence. We're going to eat that chili. I'll pick those weevils out." So my mom turns around, walks up to my father and places that pot of chili right in his chest and says, "Okay, Chili, you pick them out." And from then on, because they had made a pot of chili that had weevils in it, that was my father's nickname from my mom, Chili. And as far as I can remember back, that's what she called my father. It was a term of endearment. At the time, it probably wasn't. But if she really needed to get his attention, she would call him Charles. But yeah, Weevil'S in the Chili. So what's this podcast about? It's a tribute to my parents' recipes. And the end goal, not just with the podcast, but the end goal is I'm working on putting all of my mom's recipes in a cookbook. Now, I'm not going to make all these meals. There probably won't be pictures, but we'll see. I would love to be able to present my family, my brothers and their wives, just a hard copy of my mom's recipes. My parents used to share recipes with others and get recipes from people, like my grandmother's gumbo. And so all of that will be in the book. But I thought it'd just be a fun podcast just to get on here and share some funny stories or just share recipes and honor my parents' legacy by doing that. They would have balked at the idea of a book or a podcast. They might have thought it was kind of cool, but for the most part, they were pretty private people. So, and yes, I am outside listening to the birds chirp, the dogs bark, my dog's chasing squirrels, the chickens are in the backyard. So, goes against everything a podcast should be about as far as being in a quiet space and it being perfect. It just seemed right on this cool, crisp morning to have a cup of coffee and talk about outside and talk about my parents' story. And so that's kind of what this episode is going to be about. Other episodes it might be a little more podcast professional, but we'll see. So, with that being said, what you've all been waiting for is the chili recipe, minus the Weevil's. I'm not sure if they were rice Weevil's or what kind of Weevil's. There's no rice in this recipe, but here is my parents' chili recipe. And take in mind, some of these ingredients you can swap out for, like shortening. Some of the recipes calls for lard. This one has shortening, and you could use whatever you want to. So here we go. 1 tablespoon of shortening, 1 pound of ground beef, 2 tablespoons of onion, 1 pound can of tomatoes, 1 pound can of kidney beans, a 1/4 cup of ketchup, spelled catsup, CATSUP, 1 teaspoon of salt, a 1/4 teaspoon of pepper, 1 teaspoon of chili powder, 2 tablespoons of water, and 1 tablespoon of flour. And that is the chili recipe. I will also put this recipe in the description as it appears on the note card. My mom wrote in cursive. I can read her cursive, and sometimes there's a little bit of shorthand in here. So I think I can decipher that as well. So that's the idea for Fearless Jeans Southern Cuisine. I hope you enjoy this recipe, and if you make this recipe, feel free to comment. Let me know how it is. I cannot make all of these recipes. I grew up eating all these recipes, and they're delicious, but just for time's sake, I can't make all of these recipes. So until the next episode, thank y'all so much for listening, and let me know what you think. Thanks. Thanks for listening to this episode of Fearless Jeans Southern Cuisine.